You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing a Big Finish audio story featuring the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, called Below There. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
Hello there.
Hello there, below there. Get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt.
The line is, hello, below there.
That's right.
Oh. So I was just playing, just going to rhyme.
Yeah, there you go. So, folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or other merch by visiting sqpn.com/merch. You can see my Secrets of Star Trek one that I'm wearing if you're watching the video. We have a similar one for the Secrets of Doctor Who, and they're lots of fun, so you should check them out at sqpn.com/merch. And I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows, and that you can find wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/secrets. And stick around to the end. We have more of your listener feedback that we'd like to share with you. So this time we are talking about, as I said, Below There. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this episode?
This week, the Ninth Doctor meets Vix. Just Vix. Vix Just Vix, otherwise known as Vix Leeson, works for a transport relay station in a remote sector of space. Her job is really boring, routine, and lonely, and not everything on the station even functions properly. She works for LeapCorp, a soulless corporate transmat company that boasts of having a 100% safety record. But Vix is having psychic visions of a coming transmat disaster that will harm billions of travelers. And Vix has proof that the system isn't safe for humans because her co-worker, Tom Francis, was mentally crippled by a transmat accident. The Doctor tells Vix that she must act, that she must reveal what she knows about the system's safety. The mentally tortured Tom is trying to use the leap beam to get off the station, and the Doctor lets him do so and disperses his atoms to end his suffering. Afterwards, the Doctor and Vix establish a communications network among the other workers on other transport nodes, and to avert the forthcoming disaster, Vix reveals what she knows about the system's safety. The Doctor then leaves Vix in charge of organizing a workers' rebellion to shut down the LeapCorp system until it can be proved safe for humans. The end.
Okay. So I wanted to start by just mentioning that this is part of a series of a handful of, I think, 3 stories featuring the Ninth Doctor and Christopher Eccleston, who's back. Yeah. We mentioned that before.
This is the second batch of 3. Yes.
Yes. Yep. And the theme for this one is the Doctor crosses paths with many travelers, some at the start of their journey, some well on their way. Sometimes the journey is more interesting and more dangerous than the destination. So I think that's kind of a theme that we're going to see in these, and in this one is journeys, I think.
Yeah. The name of the set is Traveling in Hope. Right.
So let's start with our overall impression of this story. Father Cory, what'd you think of this one?
I think it was okay. Of course, it was another, big megacorp is more concerned about profits than human safety story, which is fine. But it was interesting, the interaction between the Doctor and Vix, and her coming to trust him, and her being out on her own, and had, it started out with just her routine, her daily routine, and we thought she was just alone. Turned out she wasn't. So it was okay. It wasn't the greatest, person sitting on a space station on their own story I've ever heard, but it was okay.
How about you, Jimmy?
I enjoyed it. It's not the greatest. I would agree with Father Cory. It's not the greatest Big Finish I've heard. I would put things like The Chimes at Midnight or Live 34 at a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 Doctor Who stories. I would put this around, maybe a 7, which was still solidly enjoyable for me. I like the fact it's not a typical story of Doctor Who. The typical story starts with the Doctor and any companions arriving in a location and encountering, something that has to be solved. And this has a bit of a different structure. We start not with the Doctor, but with Vix. And we have an extended sequence with barely any of the Doctor in it, as we get to know about Vix and her routine and her interactions with the station. At one point, fairly early in the story, they do an effective montage, which you don't have a lot in audio formats. You know, in a montage, you typically shift scenes visually, and that tells you time is passing. Here, they can't do that because we're not seeing anything, but they do use music cues to signal shifts in time. And we get an effective montage of her just going through her routine, and the same things are happening to her regularly, and she's really struggling to keep up, and we're dealing with her frustrations. And occasionally she gets a phone call from the Doctor, who which she's really perplexed by because she's so remote, he shouldn't be able to transmit to her. And he just says, well, I'm really clever with that. And he keeps trying to build a relationship with her. And eventually he suggests, why don't I just drop by? And she's like, how can you possibly do that? And he says, well, I'm really clever that way. And he uses the TARDIS to get to her. And, you know, this is, I don't know, a third of the way through the story or something. And then we have this middle act of the Doctor and Vix together starting to come to grips with the situation. And the Doctor makes it clear he believes she's been lying to him. And he repeatedly tells her to tell him the truth. And when she finally does, we get the third act where we meet her coworker that she's been covering for because Tom has been mentally damaged. He was trying to use the transmat system to get home to see his sick daughter before she died or might die. And he wasn't authorized to do that because of the way this culture works. Ordinary people can't afford interstellar transmat jumps. This is something for the rich. And he wasn't authorized to do this, but he was going to try to get back before his daughter's death. And he ended up repeatedly bouncing between different transmat stations in a way that, even though it was only a moment for Vix, it could have been millions of years for Tom. So he saw and was trapped alone for a significant slice of eternity and came back mentally crippled. And so we learn about that. We learn about Vix has been taking psychic suppressants because she's been having these visions of a coming transmat disaster. And all of it comes together in the third act, and Tom is released from his suffering, which we'll need to talk about, and the Doctor enables Vix to lead a workers' rebellion to shut down the system until it can be made safe. But I thought it was an effective, entertaining episode. I'd give it a 7, maybe even an 8. I thought it was quite enjoyable.
I was thinking about my assessment of it, and I liked it. There were things I really did like about it. I thought it had a bit of, you know, space gothic horror, like that, you know, on a space station, you know, sort of alien, sort of that creepy vibe, space station and deep space vibe. There's something out there. It was that early, you know, her psychic impressions was like something was stalking her. So that was effectively creepy. I did get also, speaking of vibes of, maybe because we just talked about it, Sleep No More, the episode with the thing that went put you to sleep. I forget the Orpheus.
The eye boogers.
Yeah.
Right. The eye booger monsters. But
it's Morpheus. Orpheus was the guy who went to hell and back. Morpheus is the god of sleep.
Right. Just get those mixed up. But there was you start off with the first person video of the guy on the station, and so I had a little bit, and then the Doctor shows up later, and so there was a little bit of that feel to this one. But I thought it was very Eccleston. It was very nice Doctor. You know, the personality came across. So both in the writing and obviously in the acting, I feel like Christopher Eccleston has jumped right back, you know, nearly 2 decades later to the Ninth Doctor and just really hit the ground running. I mean, it's really great. I'd love to see him in live action as the Ninth.
He also has a kind of angry young man, fight the machine vibe, which the way other Doctors don't. I mean, Third Doctor didn't have that, and the Fourth Doctor didn't really have that. But Eccleston very much has this angry young man, fight the power vibe, and this story fit him. It was nice in that respect.
Yep.
So the title below there is actually bestowed on it by the doctor, in a sense, by he says, "Hello, below there," and he's quoting from a Charles Dickens story. He doesn't come out and say that, but I looked it up. It's called The Signal Man, and
1866.
The Wikipedia summary is a railway signalman of the title tells the narrator of an apparition that's been haunting him. Each spectral appearance precedes a tragic event on the railway on which the signalman works. And so Vix is kind of like a signalman on a railway, just performing a similar function on the Transmat network, just making sure things are going where they're supposed to be going and not really doing anything else, and stuck out in the middle of nowhere as a, really in the US, it would be out in the desert west or something, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. Whereas, in here it's deep space.
Yeah, this is very clearly based on The Signal Man by Charles Dickens. Because you have the similar templates for the story. An employee who runs a transportation system is having visions of coming disasters. And that's exactly what we have here. And the doctor uses the line at one point, "Hello, below there," which, and Vix says, "What?" And he says it's from a ghost story, a really old one, which it would have been whenever Vix is living, because the story is from 1866. Right. And there's also a mention of this story in the episode of the first season of the revived Doctor Who, where Christopher Eccleston meets Charles Dickens.
Right.
And
right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, he tells him, "I'm a fan," and Charles Dickens doesn't know what that word means, and so he has to elaborate where it originally come from. "Oh, I'm a fanatic for your work." He says, "I particularly liked the story with the ghost," and Charles Dickens thinks he means A Christmas Carol. Because that's his most famous ghost story. But the doctor is like, no, the other one, meaning The Signal Man.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. That's a deep cut back. I didn't remember that.
Yeah. So they even established the doctor knew this story in the Charles Dickens episode.
This is clearly a callback to that. Speaking of callbacks, or Vix's last name is Leeson, Leeson, which is, coincidentally or not, I can pretty much guarantee, the same last name as John Leeson, the longtime voice of K9.
Yep.
So her last name is very likely a call out to him.
Nice. That's a nice little Easter egg there.
I also like how, speaking of her name, I like how the doctor, when they're in their phone call stage, is like, "So what's your name?" And she says, "Vix, just Vix." And thereafter, the doctor refers to her as Vix, just Vix.
Yes, like James Bond.
Yeah.
And then she's having these nightmares, these terror, and we're not quite sure in the beginning, like, is this actually happening to her? Is she remembering a thing? Is she seeing a thing in the future? And that's the big question throughout most of the story, as you mentioned, Jimmy.
And they make it sound like it's at first that it's a problem with the comm system, that she's picking up something through the comm system that's because it's staticky and it kind of fades in and out like a bad radio signal does. And so they kind of play it off on that. And then when it's happening, the computer is silent. She's calling the computer, and the computer doesn't respond. And so eventually it becomes clear that no, this is actually something that's within her head, that she's not hearing it from outside, but that's that psychic impulse that she's having.
And the doctor quickly picks up on the fact that she's terrified. And there's no explanation of why the doctor starts calling her. What is it? Why is the doctor contacting this remote station suddenly? Like this, because often it's the TARDIS takes him somewhere because the TARDIS knows he needs to be there. But there's no real explanation of why the doctor is at all involved.
Well, this could be the same thing. I mean, because we start with Vix, we don't see what happens before the story from the doctor's perspective. So we don't know why he's in contact with her. Hypothetically, I mean, he could have detected something that led him to realize there's a problem here he needs to deal with. But that seems a little implausible because number one, he doesn't say that, and they could have dealt with that in a line of dialogue. But also, he doesn't know who he's dealing with. He doesn't know that this is a leap core system, or even that he doesn't appear to know that he's even talking to a transmat worker. When he starts talking to her, she says, well, I work for the biggest transmat, service in the galaxy. And he says TMAT. And she says, oh, Granddad, TMAT was bought out 50 years ago by LeapCore. And by the way, Transmat and TMAT go all the way back to the second Doctor's time. So right. They've been part of this for a long time. So hypothetically, there could be any reason why he contacted her, and he could be lying about how much he knows, but, because rule 1, the Doctor lies. But it also could be the TARDIS again. He may have gotten bored and decided to switch on the radio communication system to talk to somebody, like he said, and the TARDIS hooked him up with her because she had a need for this. So it could be that. It would be interesting to know, but because of the unusual story structure, we don't really get an answer on that.
He's kind of like a ham shortwave radio operator. Just talking to whoever's out there.
Yeah. Incidentally, I like the way, I think the story has I like the fact that, the TARDIS doesn't show up until a third of the way through. The Doctor doesn't physically appear until well into the story. And we hear the TARDIS noise, and Vix describes it as a blue crate, because she's used to shipping cargo. And she's so far in the future, she doesn't know what a police box is. So she describes it as a blue crate. And he's like, hey, easy there. She's very sensitive.
But not 2 sentences later calls it a crate.
Yeah, he does. And then later she refers to it as your ship and says, oh, it's a ship now. when they're in danger and she's wanting to leave. Yep. But I also like he uses the sonic screwdriver without any explanation. We just hear it. And later she's saying, you can't get into this section. It's all, he uses it the first time with no explanation. We just hear the noise and we know what's going on as the audience. But then later they're getting into a restricted part of the transport node. And she says, but this is all locked. And he says, well, good thing I brought a key. And we hear the sonic noise again. Right. I like that. I thought there's a very effective build towards the climax. It starts kind of slow, but then it gets more and more interesting and more tense. Right. As we get towards the climax. I like how the Doctor, when he's confronting her with the fact that she's lying, he says clearly, you're the only person here, but that makes no sense because this kind of job you'd need 2 people for. They should always have 2 people on a station like this. This is clearly not one person running a whole station every hour of every day indefinitely. This is clearly designed for 2 people. It's set up for a swing shift. And she says, oh, how do you know that? And she's just made him a cup of tea. And he says, 2 mugs. It's like, if this were for one person, there might only be just 1 mug.
That's right.
Right. Well, one thing I liked is how they played Tom, how she's portraying him as he's this monster now and he's dangerous and he's gonna hurt you if you get close to him, and it turns out that no, he's not. His mind's been scrambled. He's seen way more than he should have, because it turns out that he was bouncing between the nodes of this beam, and he was awake for it, so he saw everything. And they did this whole thing of where he saw the relativistic speeds and all that stuff, but he experienced it in real time. So for him, while it might have been just a few minutes, it was like, millions of years or something like that. And that's what kind of scrambled his brain. But I like the way they played that, though, because he's this monster. And you think of classic Who, where you've got the human being who gets taken over by an alien or something like that and becomes this horrible monster that needs to be killed. And instead, it turns out that he's trying to escape, and he's trying to end his life, basically.
Or at least he's trying to escape anyway. It's not clear that he's suicidal. Right. His what happened to him is it reminds me of Zoroastrian hell, or more properly Zoroastrian purgatory, because Zoroastrians don't really have hell. But a while back I read a Zoroastrian text called The Art of Iraf, which is about a dude named Artaviraf, and he's commissioned by Zoroastrian leaders to explore the afterlife and come back and report on it. So they give him this drug and do this ritual that makes him sort of die, and he spends a bunch of time exploring the Zoroastrian afterlife. And a lot of what he sees are punishments that people experience for different sins. And he also sees heaven, Zoroastrian heaven, but he also sees this hellish purgatorial environment. And he sees like people trying to cross a river, and as they do so, they are impeded, and they aren't experiencing this communally. Every person thinks he's alone, and one day in their subjective experience is equivalent to 1,000 years. And they're gonna spend like 10,000 years crossing this river. And in reality, it's only going to be a few days, but they're experiencing it as a vastly longer period of time. And even after just one day, a person is like, I have spent 10,000 years alone. Mm-hmm. And that's even more significant in other cultures than it would be for us, because Americans are, and Westerners in general, are used to privacy and alone time. But in a lot of cultures, they ain't. I was reading an account of like a Western missionary who was in Indonesia or something, and the wife would want to get alone time, and so she would like go into the back bedroom to write letters to friends back home so she could be alone for a while. But the household staff didn't get this privacy thing. You know, they're all natives. And so they would follow her into the back bedroom so that she wouldn't have to bear the burden of being alone. and
introvert hell.
Yeah. And so in some cultures, I'm alone. It means something vastly different than it would mean to us.
Mm. Yeah. And that's the kind of the interesting thing is well, Tom was alone in the transmat beam for its a subjective million years or whatever. Vix was also alone on the station, sort of, even to the point where she was sending reports back to Earth or headquarters, whatever, but was not receiving communications. She was cut off, and she's out in this Sector 17, which is called the Oubliette.
Yep.
She says at one point that they're out of reception range, so she can basically transmit, but doesn't expect to get any replies. And exactly how that works is not clear. But they do mention it, that she expects to only be able to transmit, not to get incoming messages.
And that immediately to me doesn't make sense, because they've got this transmat beam that they're able to beam to the station. They can beam even a pre-recorded message. Right. You know, there could be a carrier wave on that transmat beam, but. Right.
That is weird. I like that they call this sector the Oubliette, which is a reference. It's French oubliette, means dungeon. Forgotten. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it also, refers to in the Middle Ages, the Oubliette was the dungeon, essentially. And that's kind of where she is. She's forgotten in this, dungeon-like area. So the doctor shows up just as the leap beam goes offline. And so that at that point I was thinking that's why he's involved here, is because he's come to save her, although apparently he's come to save everybody in the leap system, because the whole thing is about to go up, as we find out.
Yep.
That's another, incidentally, his insistence on, you've got to tell me the truth, you got to stop lying to me, tell me what you know, is another sign the doctor doesn't really know why he's here.
Yeah, right. He's just, something has brought him here and he's not sure. There's a scene where they go up to this observation platform where you can look out into the nothingness. And he notes, although they don't really follow up on this, he notes that the whole station is set up for efficiency and profit, except for this viewing platform at the top. And I was curious what that was about. So was this an indulgence by the Leap Corps, which seems so heartless and cruel otherwise?
That's how it appears. They don't establish any later significance. I mean, non-diegetically, they need to establish that there is nothing around them in space. because Vix has been having visions of people floating around them in space, and we need the doctor to see that they're not there.
Right.
And so this is an easy way to do it. In terms of a diegetic reason, they don't really explain it. But I thought that was a very effective scene. They play music because the doctor is talking about how amazing it is to look out of the viewing port, and they play this music that, you know, gives you a sense of kind of grandeur. And it was another data point that struck me that I noted of how the music in this one, the soundtrack, carries a bunch of the emotional weight, like in the montage of Vix's daily activities. You know, that's substantially helped along by the music. And so even though we don't normally think a lot about the music track in these, you know, Big Finish does compose new music for these. And in this episode in particular, the soundtrack with the music carries a bunch of the emotional weight.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that actually reminds me, like, I wanted to, you mentioned like the montage. I did like the sense of a rhythm of her day, like the cycles of, like, giving us a sense of time that she's on here and what she's doing, and that really it's hard to convey otherwise without without having her going through these routines. And so it kind of establishes the place much more so than just telling us that she's on a place by herself and that sort of thing. So I did like that they did that. All right, so let's get to the elephant in the room where the doctor kills somebody.
He kills somebody. This is murder. Tom is trying to leap off the station, and the doctor lets him, and then adjusts the leap beam so that it will disperse Tom's atoms and end his suffering. And okay, so that's euthanasia, but euthanasia is murder. So the doctor just murdered somebody here.
Yep.
And murder bad.
Yeah.
This wasn't a self-defense killing.
Yeah. Excuse the pun, but could this be called physician-assisted suicide?
Right.
and I use that pun because
on that excuse, you're asking a lot.
Yeah, I use that pun because or I use it as a pun because I that is, you know, when people talk about physician-assisted suicide, they're talking about euthanasia. You know, and it is very much, you know, morally wrong. You know, it is immoral to do. You know, there's one thing to, you know, we can go into the whole, you know, issue of, you know, medical means to prolong life and things like that, but to just say no, we're going to cut off life is always, like, in this means or by withholding necessary treatments and so on, is always morally wrong.
Yeah. Now, presumably, the doctor knows that there's no fix. There's no way he can fix Tom's mind after what it's been through. So it will be a life of torture for Tom. And I would, because that'll at least take some of the edge off of the fact the doctor just murdered this guy. But it's still a murder. And I suspect that the authors don't want us to view it that negatively, but that's what it is. And it was a choice to have the doctor kill this guy. I think they were intending to show the dark side of the doctor here a little bit, that he's willing to do this. I don't think they want us to view it as full-blown murder, but I think they did want to show us the doctor is willing to kill in a situation like this. Because they had a choice. They could have had Tom is crazy and he's trying to leap off the station, and he adjusts the beam in a way that's clearly not going to connect with anywhere. And Vic says, wait, stop. And the doctor just says, let it happen. It's the only thing that'll end his suffering.
Yeah.
And then it wouldn't have been deliberate killing on the doctor's part, but the way they chose to write it, it was deliberate killing.
Well, and I think too, the whole issue of what's going on with this leap beam is Vix is seeing these premonitions that there's going to be a crash, that the whole system's going to crash and people who are traveling in are going to die. And so this is a way that the writers could show, here's what would happen if that crash happened. If this system went down, all these people would end up like him, or they would die, being like scattered into space.
Yeah, I think end up like him is maybe what they were going for. I wasn't clear on, so would they all die, or would they just all end up like Tom?
I think it would be a combination of both, depending on where they were in the system and all that. So,
and the doctor has to spend time getting her to face this reality, because for one thing, she won't admit that Tom did anything wrong, right? That it's the system. Like, Tom didn't make a mistake in his operating the leap beam. It was the system is broken. The leap system that claims to be 100% safe and effective. And she doesn't want to be the one to blow the whistle on this thing, because she'll lose her job and lose her, whatever. She's afraid. There's
also a side plot, which we haven't mentioned, which is the reason that that Tom was, well, we did mention the reason he was using the leap beam in an unauthorized way was to get back and visit his daughter. Mm-hmm. But there's a side plot about why Vix doesn't want to reveal what's happened to Tom yet, because he's like 6 weeks away from the end of his term. And if at the end of his term, his family he'll get a payout, which mm-hmm. will go to his family. And so they'll be financially taken care of, but only if he completes his term. And since he's still alive, and the ship's automated system is registering the two people it expects to see Vix and Tom, it will recognize him as having finished his term in 6 weeks' time. And then she can come forward about all this and make sure the money gets to Tom's family. And she just has to cover for him for another 6 weeks by doing his job as well as hers. And so she's trying to do this to help Tom's family. But the doctor is trying to get her to face, your visions are getting more intense. You're taking that psychic suppressant blue phosphor stuff. How often every day now? And she's like, every hour. And so that suggests that the system-wide crash is coming very soon. You can't afford to wait 6 weeks, even though you want to help Tom.
And so her choice is, save Tom's family or save millions of people. She's faced with this because when she decides to blow the whistle, which that's the resolution, she's really kind of left Tom's family out. Like she's the bad mm-hmm. thing that Tom's family, like Tom and his family have a bad end in this story.
Yeah. What would they don't, well, okay. So for a while, it looks like they're going to do something else. Because at some point the system does its routine scan to see how many people are on the station, and it detects the doctor. Mm-hmm. And it says there's 3 people on the station. And that's when Tom leaps off. And right. So the doctor is talking to the system. It's like, just 2 people now, exactly what you expect, right? Because mm-hmm. the system had gone crazy thinking they were being invaded and put in all these lockdown protocols. And I thought they were going to have the doctor say, hey, I'll hang out here for 6 weeks with you. Mm. But they didn't. They had him leave quicker than that. Off screen, I mean, if I were a lawyer, after all this becomes public, there would be, if I were a lawyer in Vix's time, mm-hmm. I'm sure there would be a way to handle this anyway. It's like, okay, your system, whose flaws she just exposed, made this guy go crazy and kill himself. They deserve compensation.
If I were mm-hmm. the company's lawyers, I'd say that's because he used it in an unauthorized fashion.
Yeah, but it still revealed the safety flaws of the system.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like one of those late night commercials for a lawyer. Have you or a loved one worked on the beam platform and went crazy because of being bounced through the beam? You might be eligible for compensation.
You better call Saul in the 30th century.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So as the system is about to go down, Vix sends this transmission to every node, telling him to shut it. She does the whistleblower thing, and and presumably everything gets shut down, and Leap Beam gets exposed for the whatever. And as you mentioned, Father Cory, the end moral of this is corporations bad, workers united good. which is
that happens all the time on Doctor Who, though. You kind of got to
Oh, I know. And that's where I kind of said that this is, yet another one of these stories.
Another evil megacorp versus, the plucky workers who are standing up for their rights.
One thing that surprised me, though, is that the Doctor didn't rescue Vix. He went somewhere else to do whatever he was doing somewhere else, and he didn't take her with him. So she's stuck on this station with the beams down, so she can't get off.
That's a good point. She's stuck in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, but she needs to be there to coordinate this workers' rebellion. And so once the system is proved safe or whatever, safe enough, they could bring it up online enough to evacuate the workers on the stations and things like that. But he needed someone to stay in this situation to coordinate the workers and make sure they take matters into their own hands instead of just leaving it to the corporation.
Yeah.
Speaking of corporations, I'm trying to think, I'd have to go back and review the first Doctor's serials, but I can think of the evil, faceless, soulless corporation trope being in Doctor Who as early as the second Doctor's time. That's the original TMAT Corporation is there. And so I know it goes back at least that far. We also have others that are kind of like that, like in the Terror from the Sea, which we did recently. Right. Even though they're not, the seaweed is the monster, but the corporation's activities are what a contributing factor here. The corporation is still evil. And I wonder if it goes all the way back to the first Doctor, but I'd have to check. It's not, since we had so many historicals there, that took up a bunch of the time, and we didn't have as many corporate-centered episodes. One that kind of is like that is the War Machines, where you have, which we haven't done yet, where you have you have people building these these basically war drones, robots to fight wars, and an AI kind of gets out of hand. So we've got an early,
Terminator.
I was trying to think of the name of the corporation from that, Starlink or whatever it is.
Oh,
Skynet.
Starlink. Yeah, completely the same.
Dr. Freud, let me help you up. And there was always especially in Classic Who, there was always that slightly crossover with scientists out of control. Science out of control, often with big business, overtones on that. But so they often had those kind of mixing together.
Yeah, at least early on, the scientist one was more prevalent than the corporation one.
So anything else you want to say about this episode, Father Cory?
Nothing here.
How about you, Jimmy?
Nope.
All right. So let's move on to our listener feedback. And our feedback comes from our recent episode, Stones of Blood, which was a Fourth Doctor story. And Mark Gillies wrote in on our YouTube channel. Admittedly, I haven't seen this episode in years, but this was one of the ones that made me love Doctor Who. The local channel started airing Doctor Who with the Key to Time series. This was the series that hooked me. I loved the humor, and the horror worked great for an 11-year-old. I had no trouble with the Stones being the villain. Maybe this is a case of adults looking at a villain from our perspective and not a child's, or maybe I was just scared easily. As you discussed the episode, I had amazing nostalgia for these episodes and remembered watching them for the first time late Saturday nights in the early 80s. Everyone has their Doctor, and mine was Tom Baker. Thanks for the podcast, guys, and keep up the good work.
My first Doctor was Tom Baker, but my local PBS station started with, in the mid-'70s, with Robot, the very first Tom Baker story. So I actually got a glimpse of the third Doctor as he was regenerating into the fourth. But I know I loved the Tom Baker serials, and I love other Doctor serials, but yeah, nostalgia for these things is a real factor.
Yeah. I want to say Tom Baker was probably my first, only by just the number chance, the chance that, because Tom Baker had the most serials of any of the classic Doctors individually. So, the odds are pretty good that he was. I don't remember, like what the first story was I saw or anything like that. But obviously, I remember watching him as a kid.
I don't know the history or for sure, but I'm on to bet that for a lot of American Doctor Who fans, that for American Doctor Who being shown in America on TV, it was Tom Baker that was the start of it.
It was. That was really when the BBC started selling Doctor Who to America. It was with the Tom Baker era.
Interesting. They tried to sell it in America right from the beginning. Yeah. Right from the start. But it took off better in more of the British Commonwealth countries than it did here.
Right. And then you get 7 seasons of Tom Baker. It's no wonder for so many people, Tom Baker was the Doctor. Just that there was for so many Americans anyway. So thank you, Mark, for your feedback. Greatly appreciate it. So that's it for us this time. We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Gabe S., James S., Joel L., Pascal H., and Marguerite K. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Simon Yannick, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to know what you thought of Below There, this Ninth Doctor Big Finish story. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send us an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And you can watch the Secrets of Doctor Who on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the third Doctor story, Carnival of Monsters.
Ooh, cool.
Nice.
Trapped in a miniscope. And Droshigs.
Yeah.
Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, I spy with my little eye something that begins with S.